Under the fractured moon, a single snowflake traced the scar on her cheek like a forgotten promise. Ilara's boots crunched through the eternal frost of the whispering peaks, each step a defiance against the wind that clawed at her threadbare cloak. The academy loomed ahead, its spires of black ice piercing the bruised sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. They had sent her here not for learning, but for erasure, a punishment wrapped in the guise of exile. Rejected by her own pack, marked as the Omega who dared whisper dissent against the Alpha King's unyielding decrees, she was cast out to wither in this forsaken place. The Elder's words still echoed in her mind, sharp as the blizzard's bite. Prove your worth, or let the cold claim what little fire remains in you. The air tasted of pine and iron, the scent of blood long spilled into the snow. Ilara's hand drifted to the pendant at her throat, a simple silver chain bearing a vial of crimson, the last drop of her mother's blood, sealed there before the fever took her. It was her only inheritance, a symbol of the lifeblood that bound her to the old ways, the lunar rites the king had branded heresy. The vial swung gently against her chest, warm against the chill that seeped into her bones. She had been 14 when they rejected her, her Omega nature deemed too volatile, too prone to visions that unsettled the pack's rigid hierarchy. Now, at 23, she carried the weight of those years like an unseen chain, her body lean from hunger, her eyes shadowed by the ghosts of what might have been. The gates of the academy groaned open as she approached, unmanned save for the wind's mournful howl. No welcoming torchlight flickered here. Only the pale glow of the moon illuminated the courtyard, where statues of forgotten alphas stood sentinel, their stone eyes hollow with judgment. Ilara paused, her breath fogging the air in ragged bursts. The cold was a living thing, wrapping around her like the arms of an unwanted lover, whispering of surrender. But she would not yield. Not yet. The academy was said to break the unbreakable, training outcasts in the arts of war and shadow, secrets of the Diusa that the king coveted and feared. If she survived its trials, perhaps she could claw her way back to her pack, demand the recognition stolen from her. Or perhaps, like so many before, she would vanish into the snow, her story reduced to a cautionary tale. Inside, the halls echoed with silence, broken only by the distant drip of melting ice from the vaulted ceilings. Ilara's footsteps echoed as she made her way to the dormitory wing, assigned to the lowest barracks where the rejects like her were housed. The room was a cavern of gray stone, lit by a single hearth where embers struggled against the draft. 3 other women occupied the space, a scarred warrior from the eastern clans, a seer with eyes like clouded quartz, and a young shifter whose furred ears twitched at every sound. They glanced up from their tasks, sharpening blades, murmuring incantations, but offered no words. Trust was a luxury here. Survival demanded solitude. Ilara claimed a bunk in the corner, dropping her meager pack beside it. The pendant caught the firelight, the blood within swirling like a trapped storm. She traced its curve with a calloused finger, remembering her mother's final words. "This blood holds the path, child. It will guide you when the moon demands truth." But what truth could guide an Omega through a place built on lies? The Academy's curriculum was a gauntlet of illusions, lessons in deception, combat under enchanted skies, and rituals that invoked the Diusa's wrath. Only 1 in 10 emerged whole. The rest were fodder for the wilds or the king's endless wars. As night deepened, the wind rose to a wail, carrying faint uivos from the peaks beyond. Ilara lay awake, the thin blanket no match for the cold that gnawed at her core. Her scar itched, a jagged line from the rejection rite where the pack's beta had slashed her face to mark her as unworthy. It had healed crooked, a constant reminder of the blood she had spilled that night in futile resistance. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of the king's court, golden halls stained with the red of betrayals, where alphas schemed under the watchful eye of the moon. She had seen him once, from afar, during a rare summit. King Thorn, the alpha whose reign was forged in fire and frost, his gaze as unyielding as the mountains themselves. Whispers spoke of his guilt, a hidden wound from a war that claimed his mate, driving him to purge any who evoked the old faiths. Was he the architect of her exile, or merely the shadow over it all? Dawn broke gray and merciless, summoning the initiates to the training grounds. Ilara joined the line of shivering figures, her body protesting the bite of the wind as instructors in fur-lined cloaks barked orders. The first trial was simple: navigate the frozen labyrinth blindfolded, guided only by instinct. They tied a strip of cloth over her eyes, the world reduced to sensation, the crunch of snow underfoot, the metallic tang of fear sweat from those around her, the distant crack of ice. Her hand instinctively touched the pendant, its warmth a faint pulse against her skin. As she stepped forward, the vial seemed to hum, a subtle vibration that tugged at her senses, pulling her left when logic screamed right. She emerged first, blinking against the sudden light, the labyrinth's exit a archway of hoarfrost. The instructors exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. Whispers rippled through the group, an Omega, unblooded in the rites, succeeding where hardened warriors failed. Ilara felt the weight of their stares, a mix of envy and suspicion. In this place of punishment, talent was a double-edged blade. It could elevate her, or mark her for the fall. By evening, as the moon climbed once more, Ilara sat alone by the hearth, the fire's glow dancing on the vial's surface. The blood within caught the flames, turning from crimson to molten gold. She wondered if this was the beginning of her renascimento, or merely the prelude to deeper exile. The wind howled outside, carrying the promise of storms yet to come, and in the silence of her heart she felt the first stirrings of a destiny she could not yet name. The days blurred into a relentless rhythm at the academy, each one carving deeper into Ilara's resolve like the wind etching patterns into the ice-clad walls. The trials escalated, demanding not just survival, but surrender, to the labyrinth's illusions, to the mock battles where enchanted blades sang through the air, leaving welts that burned like accusations. Her success in the first test had painted a target on her back. The other initiates whispered of favoritism, their eyes narrowing whenever she passed, the scarred warrior from the east even spitting into the snow at her feet. But Ilara pressed on, the vial at her throat a constant anchor, its crimson contents seeming to pulse in time with her heartbeat, warmer now, as if awakening to the moon's insistent call. One twilight, as the sun bled orange across the jagged peaks, the instructors summoned them to the outer wards for an unscheduled drill. The air hung heavy with the scent of impending storm, pine resin mingling with the sharp tang of oiled steel. Ilara stood among the line of initiates, her breath visible in the chill, when a shadow detached from the tree line, a lone figure stumbling through the drifts. Cloaked in a mantle torn and muddied, his steps uneven as if the earth itself rejected him. He collapsed at the ward's edge, a guttural groan escaping his lips, muffled by the wind's rising moan. The instructors froze, their hands drifting to weapons, but Ilara's instincts surged before reason could intervene. She felt it first in her chest, a pull, instinctive and feral, like the tide drawn to the moon. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her forward through the snow, ignoring the barked commands to halt. Up close, the man was a ruin of power. Broad-shouldered, his frame corded with muscle beneath the rags, but blood seeped from a gash across his ribs, staining the white ground in dark rivulets. His face was half hidden by a hood, yet his scent hit her like a storm, alpha dominance laced with something broken, like thunder cracked by sorrow. Eyes the color of storm clouds met hers, fierce and guarded, flickering with recognition she couldn't place. "Who dares approach?" one instructor snarled, but Ilara knelt beside him, her hand hovering over the wound. The pendant swung free, the vial catching the dying light, and for a heartbeat, the blood within swirled violently, as if alive. The man's gaze locked on it, his breath hitching, a flicker of something raw. Fear? Hunger? Crossing his features before he masked it with a grimace. "Leave him," Ilara murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The connection was there, unbidden, a thread of empathy weaving through the fear that coiled in her gut. He was no ordinary wanderer. The air around him hummed with restrained power, the kind that bent packs to its will. Curiosity warred with caution. Why did her blood sing in his presence? Why did the cold seem less biting when his eyes held hers? The instructors hauled him inside under guard, muttering of spies or deserters from the border wars. They bound his wounds in the infirmary, a dim chamber lit by sputtering torches that cast long shadows on the stone. Ilara was dismissed, but sleep evaded her that night. She paced her bunk, the vial heavy against her skin, its warmth now an insistent throb. Dreams came in fragments, a throne room awash in fire, a queen's lifeless form cradled in alpha arms, the moon weeping silver tears over fields of blood-soaked snow. She woke with a start, the howl of distant wolves echoing her unrest. By morning, rumors spread like frost on glass. The stranger was no low-born rogue, but a fugitive from the king's own guard, marked by betrayal in the high courts. Ilara volunteered for watch duty, drawn inexorably to the cell where they held him, a barred alcove in the undercroft. The air down there was thick with damp and the metallic bite of fear, torches flickering against walls veined with quartz that gleamed like trapped moonlight. He sat against the stone, shirtless, the fresh bandages stark white against his tanned skin, marred by scars that told tales of battles won and lost. A jagged line bisected his chest, old and faded, but the new wound wept red, mirroring the vial's contents. "You," he said as she approached, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the bars, stirring the fine hairs on her arms. "The Omega with the blood charm. Why risk the guard's wrath?" She hesitated, the instinctive urge to flee clashing with the curiosity that rooted her in place. "It called to me," she admitted, fingers brushing the pendant. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, a gravitational force that made her Omega senses flare, submission warring with defiance. Yet there was no command in his gaze, only a melancholy depth, as if he carried the weight of forgotten oaths. "You're no prisoner, not truly. What hunts you?" His laugh was bitter, echoing off the stones like cracking ice. "The past, always the past." He shifted, wincing, and she caught a glimpse of a tattoo beneath the bandages, a crowned wolf, the mark of royalty. Her breath caught. King Thorn? Here, in this pit of exiles? The Alpha whose purges had scattered her world, whose guilt-fueled edicts had branded her a heretic. Fear spiked through her, sharp as the rejection scar on her cheek, but beneath it, that pull intensified, irrational and undeniable. "I should hate you," she whispered, the words tasting of ash. The vial burned hot now, the blood within churning as if protesting her denial. He reached through the bars, not to grab, but to trace the air near her hand, his touch ghosting close enough to raise gooseflesh on her skin. "Many do," he replied, his eyes searching hers, stormy and shadowed by unspoken remorse. "But you see more than most. That blood. It whispers truths the moon hides." The guard's footsteps echoed from above, shattering the moment. Ilara stepped back, heart pounding, the connection lingering like smoke from a dying fire, instinctive, denied, born of fear laced with an unwelcome spark of understanding. As she fled the undercroft, the wind outside howled in sympathy, carrying the scent of approaching foes, and she wondered if this encounter was salvation or the blade that would finally break her. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The Undercroft's damp chill clung to Ilara's skin, like a second shadow as she ascended the spiral stairs, the echo of Thorn's words lingering in her ears, a confession wrapped in thorns. The Academy's stone corridors felt narrower now, the torch flames leaping higher as if sensing the storm brewing beyond the walls. She had seen the truth in his eyes, the crowned wolf tattoo, the weight of a throne that crushed as much as it exalted. King Thorn, the architect of her exile, reduced to a fugitive in this frozen purgatory. Hatred should have burned through her, a purifying fire, but instead it twisted into something murkier. Pity, perhaps, or the cruel mimicry of kinship. Both were outcasts here, marked by blood and betrayal. Word of the prisoner's identity spread like veins of frost across the Academy's halls, whispered in the armory where blades were whetted and in the refectory where meager rations were doled out under watchful eyes. The instructors, loyal to the crown yet bound by the Academy's code of neutrality, debated his fate in hushed tones. "A king's blood could ransom us all," one growled, his voice gravel over ice. But Ilara knew better. Thorn's pursuers would raise the peaks to reclaim him, and in the chaos, no exile would be spared. That night, as the moon hung bloated and silver over the whispering peaks, she slipped back to the Undercroft. A stolen loaf of bread and a flask of herbal tincture clutched in her hands. The guards were lax, distracted by the rising wind that rattled the gates like the claws of unseen beasts. He was waiting, not chained but alert, his form silhouetted against the quartz-veined wall that shimmered faintly in the torchlight. The bandages on his ribs were stained afresh. The scent of blood, sharp and coppery, mingling with the earth's musty breath. Ilara paused at the bars, the vial at her throat pulsing warmer, as if the crimson within recognized its kin in his wounds. "You return," Thorn murmured, his voice a low timbre that resonated through her bones, stirring the Omega instincts she had long suppressed. There was no command in it, only a quiet weariness, like a wolf too long from the pack. "I bring aid, not alliance," she replied, sliding the provisions through the bars. Her fingers brushed his as he took them, a spark leaping between them, electric, unbidden, like lightning fracturing the northern sky. She pulled back, the rejection scar on her cheek throbbing in protest, a reminder of the pack's blade and the king's distant decree that had sealed her fate. Yet his touch lingered in her senses, warm against the cold that seeped from the stones. "Who hunts you? The court? Rivals to your throne?" Thorn's laugh was a hollow echo, his storm-cloud eyes darkening as he tore into the bread. "All of them, a beta lord from the southern clans, ambitious and venomous, who whispers that my guilt weakens the realm. He struck the blow that felled me in the border skirmish, but it was no accident, poison in the blade meant to drag me low before the full court." He paused, tracing the edge of his bandage, the motion revealing more scars, a lattice of old wounds, each a chapter of war and loss. "My mate. She died in the last great purge, caught in the crossfire of my vengeance against the old faiths. The Deuce's rights you carry in that vial. They were her solace, and I banned them to bury my shame. Now, that shame hunts me back." Ilara's breath caught, the vial burning against her skin like a brand. Her mother's blood, sealed in silver, held echoes of those same rites, visions of paths unseen, whispers from the moon that the king had silenced. Empathy stirred uninvited, a fragile bloom in the frost of her resentment. She had lost everything to his edicts. He had lost a queen to his own hand. "Then we're both ghosts of your making," she said softly, sinking to her haunches before the bars. The air between them thickened, charged with the scent of his blood and the faint, herbal sharpness of the tincture. Outside, the wind howled louder, carrying the distant bay of hounds, pursuers closing in, their howls threading through the night like accusations. Before dawn, the assault came. Alarms shattered the silence, horns blaring from the ramparts as shadows swarmed the outer wards. Ilara was roused from fitful sleep by the clamor, her roommates scrambling for weapons as the academy mobilized. From the battlements, she saw them, a war band of southern betas, cloaked in steel and fur, their banners snapping like wounds in the blizzard. Torches flared against the snow, casting crimson glows that danced like spilled blood, and at their head rode a figure in ebony armor, his helm crested with iron thorns, the beta lord, no doubt, come to claim his prize. Chaos erupted, the academy's defenders clashing in a frenzy of steel and snarls. Ilara grabbed a short sword from the armory, her heart pounding as she fought her way toward the undercroft. An initiate fell beside her, arrow-pierced, his blood steaming on the frost. She pressed on, the vial swinging wildly, its warmth a beacon in the melee. She reached the cell as the first attackers breached the lower levels, their boots thundering like avalanches. Thorn was on his feet, barricading the door with a splintered bench, his face pale but set with feral resolve. "Foolish Omega," he growled as she fumbled with the keys stolen from a fallen guard. "Run! This is my war." "Not while it becomes mine," she shot back, the bars swinging open. Together, they moved as one, instinct guiding her blade to parry a blow meant for his flank, his arm shielding her from a slashing claw. The connection deepened in the heat of battle, a bond forged not in tenderness, but in shared desperation, empathy threading through the fear like moonlight piercing storm clouds. He fought with the grace of a king, each strike precise despite his wounds, but it was her visions that turned the tide, the vial's pulse revealing hidden passages in the undercroft, paths snaking through the mountain's veins where the attackers could not follow. They emerged into a hidden cavern behind the academy, its walls aglow with bioluminescent fungi that mimicked the moon's pale fire. Panting, bloodied but unbroken, they collapsed against the damp stone, the sounds of battle fading to muffled roars. Thorn's hand found hers in the dimness, not in dominance, but in quiet gratitude, his touch steadying the tremor in her limbs. "You could have left me to rot," he whispered, his breath warm against the cavern's chill, eyes searching hers with a vulnerability that cracked his regal mask. "And you could have commanded me away," she replied, the vial cooling now, its blood settling like a truce. In that moment, denial cracked, curiosity yielding to a tentative trust, the first fragile weave of a bond born from the crucible of survival. The wind above sang of enemies regrouped, but here, in the earth's embrace, they shared silence, two wounded souls guarding each other's flame against the encroaching dark. The cavern's glow pulsed like a hidden heartbeat, the bioluminescent fungi weaving threads of silver light across the damp stone, casting Ilara and Thorn in a ethereal half-shadow. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and lingering blood, their breaths mingling in ragged harmony as the distant clamor of battle seeped through the rock like a fading echo. Ilara's hand still tingled from his touch, a warmth that defied the chill seeping from the walls, but she drew back, curling her fingers around the vial at her throat. Its crimson contents had stilled, yet it felt heavier now, as if it had absorbed the night's fury and grown dense with unspoken secrets. Thorn watched her, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the faint luminescence, the lines of his face etched deeper by exhaustion, and that ever-present veil of guilt. "You fight like one born to it," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that stirred the still air, breaking the silence that had wrapped them like a shroud. He shifted against the stone, wincing as the motion tugged at his bandaged ribs, fresh blood seeping through in dark blooms. The crowned wolf tattoo on his chest gleamed faintly, a mark of power now tarnished by flight. But there's more to you than steel and instinct. That pendant. It guided us here. I've seen relics like it in the old scrolls, whispered of in the Deus's temples before I burned them to ash. Ilara's pulse quickened, the vial warming against her skin like an ember rekindled. She had always dismissed her mother's words as the fever's delusion, the blood as mere sentiment, a tether to a life stolen too soon. But in the Academy's trials, it had hummed, pulling her through illusions and ice, revealing paths where others saw only walls. Now, in this buried sanctum, with the Alpha King's gaze upon her, denial frayed like the edges of her cloak. "It's nothing," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. The rejection scar on her cheek itched, a phantom burn reminding her of the pack's scorn, the king's edicts that had branded her visions as madness. Just a trinket from a dead woman. It doesn't change what you are or what you've taken from me. Thorn's expression softened, not with the arrogance of command, but with a raw vulnerability that cracked the armor of his kingship. He reached out again, this time pausing short of her, his fingers hovering as if afraid to profane the space between. "I've taken much from many," he admitted, the words heavy as falling snow. "My mate's death. It hollowed me. I thought purging the old ways would silence the ghosts, but they howl louder now. That Beta Lord Varric, he was her kin once. His ambition festers from the grudge I planted. And you, Ilara. Your eyes hold the same fire she had, the kind that sees beyond the throne's shadow." The cavern seemed to contract, the fungi's light dimming as if the moon itself withdrew its gaze. Ilara felt a pressure building in her chest, a tide rising unbidden, drawn by his confession. The vial burned hot now, searing through her tunic, and she gasped, clutching it as visions flooded her mind. Not dreams, but revelations sharp as shattered ice. She saw Thorn's past unfold like a tapestry under lunar light. The purge, flames devouring temple scrolls, while his mate's screams pierced the night. Varric's blade, poisoned with betrayal in a skirmish veiled as honor, and further, a web of paths diverging, war that would consume the peaks, or a hidden rite to bind the fractured packs. The blood in the vial swirled, crimson tendrils coiling like living smoke, and she heard her mother's voice, faint but insistent. "The Pathfinder's gift awakens in blood and moonlight. Guide the broken king, or let the storm claim all." Ilara staggered, her free hand pressing against the cavern wall, the stone cool and unyielding beneath her palm. The visions sharpened, pulling her deeper. A frozen rose blooming at the heart of a throne room, its petals unfurling to reveal a unity forged in mercy, not conquest. Thorn was there, crowned not in gold, but in silver light, his guilt transmuted to strength. But another path loomed, dark and jagged, where Varric's forces overran the Academy, Thorn slain, and Ilara's blood spilled to sate the victor's rage. The choice hung between them, a moral precipice, power through vengeance, or compassion that could redeem a realm. "You see it?" Thorn breathed, rising to his knees despite the pain, his eyes widening as he grasped her arm to steady her. The contact ignited the visions further, their minds brushing in a surge of shared clarity, the instinctive bond from their escape now blooming into something profound, a lunar tether. He recoiled slightly, not in fear but awe, the melancholy in his gaze yielding to dawning realization. "The Deusa's mark. You're the Pathfinder, the Omega foretold in the rites I destroyed. Your blood. It charts destinies, reveals the threads the moon weaves. Without you, my path ends in blood and isolation. With you—" His voice trailed, thick with the weight of prophecy, his hand lingering on her arm, thumb tracing the pulse at her wrist. The air hummed with potential, the cavern's glow flaring brighter as if the earth itself bore witness. Ilara pulled away, the visions receding like a tide, leaving her breathless and trembling. The vial cooled, its blood settling into a serene swirl, but the revelation lingered. A fire kindled in her soul. She was no longer just the rejected exile. She was the key to his fate, and perhaps her own renascimento. Yet doubt coiled in her gut. Could she guide a king who had shattered her world? The wind above the cavern moaned, carrying the faint howls of Varroc's hounds, drawing nearer, and in that moment, under the fungi's mimic moon, Ilara felt the stirrings of a destiny that demanded not submission, but choice. The philosophy of it settled in her bones. What is strength, if not choosing mercy amid the storm? Thorn's eyes held hers, stormy depths reflecting her turmoil, the bond between them a fragile bridge over the abyss of their shared wounds. As the howls grew insistent, echoing through the stone like a call to judgment, she knew the past would not yield easily. Rival packs, traitors in the court, the weight of a crown stained red. But in her, the hidden gift had awakened, a beacon in the frost, promising that rejection could forge not just survival, but salvation. Comment, Luna, if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The howls pierced the cavern's fragile sanctuary like shards of ice driven into flesh, drawing Ilara and Thorn from their momentary truce into the unyielding grip of the night. The fungi's glow dimmed as if recoiling from the intrusion, leaving only the faint silver seep of moonlight filtering through a narrow fissure overhead, a sliver of the fractured moon watching their ascent. Ilara's boots scraped against the rough stone as they climbed the hidden passage her visions had revealed, the vial at her throat swaying with each step, its crimson contents sloshing like a heartbeat quickened by dread. The air grew sharper, laced with the metallic tang of blood from the academy's breached walls above, and the wind's wail carried the clamor of steel on steel, snarls mingling with the cries of the fallen. Thorn moved ahead, his form a shadowed bulk of restrained power, but he glanced back often, his storm-gray eyes locking on hers with an intensity that both anchored and unnerved her. The bond thrummed between them now, no longer a whisper but a current, instinctive, pulling at her omega core like the moon tugging the tides. Yet it was laced with resistance. She could not forget the edicts that had exiled her, the pack's blade that scarred her cheek under his distant command. Forgiveness felt like surrender, a chain forged from her own blood, but the visions lingered, painting paths of ruin if she turned away. What was freedom, if not the liberty to choose redemption over the rot of vengeance? They emerged into the storm-lashed wilds beyond the academy, the whispering peaks a maelstrom of swirling snow and torchlit chaos. Varroc's warband had overrun the outer defenses, their banners of iron thorns snapping like accusations in the gale. The Beta Lord himself stood at the fore, a towering figure in ebony armor etched with runes of conquest, his helm discarded to reveal a face twisted by ambition, pale scars crisscrossing his jaw, eyes burning with the fever of betrayal. He was kin to Thorn's lost mate, Ilara knew from the visions, his grudge a poison deeper than the blade he had wielded. Around him, milled remnants of her own pack, the elders who had rejected her, their furred cloaks dusted white, faces hardened by the cold logic of survival. They had come not as allies, but as opportunists, lured by Varroc's promises of favor in a new regime, trading her erasure for scraps from the throne. Ilara. The call sliced through the wind, sharp and disbelieving. It was her former alpha, Garrick, stepping from the pack's ranks, his once familiar gaze now clouded with calculation. The man who had slashed her during the rejection rite, marking her as unworthy, now extended a hand as if to reclaim what he had cast away. The Academy falls. Join us. Prove your visions were no curse, but a gift for the true pack. His words dripped with false warmth, but beneath them lurked the old hierarchy, the demand for submission that had driven her into exile. She froze, the snow whipping her cloak like invisible claws, the vial pulsing hot against her chest. Thorn tensed beside her, a low growl rumbling from his throat, his hand drifting to the dagger at his belt. The air crackled with tension, the moon's pale light glinting off drawn blades and bared fangs. Varric's forces encircled them, a ring of steel and shadow, their howls a chorus of triumph that drowned the Academy's dying echoes. This was the judgment, not just blades, but the past incarnate. Her pack's betrayal, the traitor's ambition, the rival's blade poised to sever the fragile thread of destiny. Thorn stepped forward, his presence unfurling like a banner of ancient authority, even wounded and ragged. "Varric," he called, voice carrying over the storm like thunder rolled low. "Your poison ends here. The Deusa's rights rise again, not through my command, but through what you've tried to bury." The Beta Lord laughed, a sound like cracking ice, his eyes flicking to Alara with predatory gleam. "The king speaks of ghosts while his realm crumbles. And you, Omega, your blood called you to us, didn't it? Join the victors, or die with the fallen." The vial burned now, searing through layers of doubt, and visions cascaded once more. Two paths diverging under the moon's fractured gaze. One led to war, Thorn rallying hidden loyalists, her pack turning on Varric in a frenzy of blood and fire, but at the cost of her freedom, binding her to a throne stained by endless cycles of guilt and purge. Garrick's hand would close around her arm, pulling her back into the pack's suffocating fold, her gift twisted into a tool for their gain. The other path whispered of mercy, forgiveness not as weakness, but as the blade that severed old chains. She could walk away, claim her exile as rebirth, leaving Thorn to face Varric alone, freedom's cold embrace, untainted by love's complicated fire. Alara's breath fogged the air, her scar throbbing in rhythm with the wind's howl. The bond with Thorn tugged insistently, his scent, earth and storm and shadowed remorse, wrapping around her like a mantle against the freeze. He turned to her then, not as king, but as the broken alpha from the cavern, his eyes pleading without words. "Choose us, or let the storm claim what we've glimpsed." Garrick advanced, his pack fanning out, while Varric raised his sword, the blade catching moonlight in a deadly arc. The choice crystallized in her core, love or freedom, forgiveness or war, not a reward, but a trial that would redefine her soul. With a cry that tore from her depths, raw and visceral, Alara lunged not toward her pack, but to Thorn's side, her hand clasping his in defiance of the encircling foes. The vial shattered the silence, its blood surging as if unleashed, visions flooding outward, not just to her, but to him, a shared revelation that rippled through the snow like liquid silver. Paths illuminated, Varric's fall not through slaughter, but through the exposure of his treachery, her pack's elders witnessing the Deusa's truth in the crimson glow. Mercy could crown them, turning betrayal to alliance, guilt to unity. But war loomed if she faltered, the moon's light fracturing further, blood spilling to soak the eternal frost. The clash erupted then, blades singing through the gale. But Alara's choice hung in the balance, a moral precipice where compassion warred with the instinct to flee. As Varric charged, his iron thorns gleaming, she felt the weight of it all, the pack's hollow call, the rival's venom, Thorn's hand warm in hers. What is strength, if not forgiving the wound that scarred you, choosing love's redemption over freedom's solitary chill? The storm raged on, the moon bearing witness as her heart teetered on the edge of war or the fragile dawn of peace. The storm's fury peaked as Alara's fingers intertwined with Thorn's, a defiant knot against the howling gale that lashed the whispering peaks into a frenzy of white and shadow. The vial at her throat shattered its fragile containment in that instant, the silver chain snapping under the surge of her visions, crimson blood spilling free to mingle with the snow at their feet. It spread like veins of fire across the frost, glowing under the fractured moon's gaze, illuminating the encircling foes in a spectral red that turned Varric's triumphant snarl into a mask of uncertainty. The Beta Lord's sword hovered mid-arc, iron thorns dripping meltwater, his eyes widening as the blood's light revealed not just paths, but truths etched in the ether. The poison in his blade, the forged missives that had incited the southern clans against the crown, the shadows of his ambition laid bare like a heart flayed open. Ilara's breath came in sharp, burning gasps, the rejection scar on her cheek pulsing with the rhythm of her pounding heart, as if the old wound wept in solidarity with this new unraveling. The visions cascaded through her, no longer confined to her mind, but shared in the bond that now thrummed between her and Thorn, a lunar current, fierce and unyielding, binding their souls in the crucible of choice. She saw it all, the warpath where Varric's charge would cleave Thorn's throat. Her pack descending in opportunistic fury, their blades claiming her as the prize of their betrayal, the Academy's ruins swallowed by endless purges. Blood would flow like rivers, freezing into crimson icicles that hung from the peaks as monuments to unhealed guilt. But the other thread, woven in Mercy's fragile silk, unfurled, a union not of conquest, but of revelation. The blood's glow would expose Varric's treachery to the Pax, turning his allies against him, her former kin witnessing the Deuce's judgment in the spilled essence of her mother's legacy. Garrick lunged first, his pack's howls rising in a discordant chorus, claws extended to drag her back into the fold of forgotten oaths. "Traitor to your blood!" he roared, the wind whipping his words into barbs that stung her skin. But Ilara stood firm, the warmth of Thorn's hand anchoring her against the instinctive pull of the pack's call, a siren's song of belonging laced with chains. Freedom had tempted her, a solitary path through the wilds where she could wander as the pathfinder unbound. Her gift a private flame unshared with a king whose decrees had scarred her world. Yet love, resisted so long, rationalized as folly born of battle's haze, now revealed itself as the true trial, not a reward, but a redemption forged in the fire of mutual wounds. To choose him was to sacrifice the illusion of isolation, to heal the guilt that hollowed his gaze, and in turn, mend the fractures of her own exile. Thorn moved with her, their bodies a synchronized dance amid the chaos, his dagger flashing to parry Garrick's strike, while she channeled the visions into words that cut deeper than steel. "See the truth!" she cried, her voice rising above the storm, the blood's crimson pool expanding like a blooming rose frozen in time, its petals of light projecting illusions onto the snow. Varric's hand dipping into a vial of poison during the border skirmish, his whispers to the elders of her pack promising thrones built on Thorn's corpse. The revelations rippled outward, the pack's faltering, eyes widening in the moonlit glow as doubt seeded mutiny. Varric bellowed in rage, charging through the fray, his ebony armor cracking against Thorn's guard. But the king fought not with the fury of old vendettas, but with a measured grace born of her influence, the philosophy of mercy guiding his blade to disarm rather than destroy. Blood sprayed in arcs, hot and vital, staining the snow in patterns that echoed the vial's final spill, Thorn's wound reopening to mingle with hers, a symbolic union under the moon's fractured witness. Ilara felt the sacrifice keenly, a piece of her mother's essence lost to the frost, her body aching from a glancing claw that raked her arm, the pain a visceral reminder that rebirth demanded cost. Yet as Varric stumbled, betrayed by his own turning forces, Garrick's pack recoiling from the exposed lies, she saw the cure take root. Thorn disarmed the Beta Lord with a final, precise thrust that shattered his sword, not his life. Compassion over conquest, the choice that crowned them not in gold, but in the silver light of forgiveness. Varric fell to his knees, the wind howling his defeat as the packs, shamed and enlightened, lowered their weapons. The Deuce's rites rekindled in the crimson testament at Ilara's feet. In the aftermath, as the storm ebbed to a mournful whisper, Thorn turned to her, his face blood-streaked and weary, but his eyes alight with a renascimento she had ignited. The bond sealed then, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet press of his forehead to hers, breaths mingling in the chill air scented with pine and iron. "You chose us," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, his hand tracing the scar on her cheek, not as a mark of shame, but of strength forged in exile. Elara leaned into him, the cold no longer a foe but a canvas for their shared warmth, her omega heart yielding to the alpha's melancholy soul. Rejection had birthed this, a queen from the academy's shadows, the only graduate who made the king tremble not in fear, but in awe of destiny's weave. The moon mended its fractures overhead, casting a whole light over the peaks, where the blood in the snow began to fade, absorbed into the earth like a promise kept. Packs gathered tentatively, whispers of unity stirring amid the weavos that now sang of peace, not war. Elara felt the weight lift, her gift no longer a curse but a beacon, guiding not just paths, but hearts toward compassion's throne. In Thorn's embrace, love proved its truth, not immediate bliss, but a slow-burning redemption, where every wound healed another, and the flame of their union kept despair at bay. The wind sighed approval, carrying embers of distant fires across the frost, a testament that from punishment's depths she had risen as the Alpha King's salvation, feared only by the darkness they had conquered together. What is strength, if not the mercy that binds the broken into wholeness? Under the mended moon, Elara and Thorn stood as one, the eternal snow bearing witness to a love that transcended hierarchies, turning exile into empire and guilt into grace. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.